We are minus one of our presenters today. Dr. Girardi had something unexpected come up. So it'll be myself and Dr. Garcia. And luckily we have a lot of admissions experience between the two of us. And also I think have the benefit of exploring the mentorship relationship that Gabe and I have had over the years, because he was the Dean of Admissions when I started, and I was a program coordinator and then a director. And then I became a Dean of Admissions. So I'm supposed to be moderating this session, but I might fill in a little bit as we go forward because we lost one of our speakers. So it is my honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Gabe Garcia. He is has been a phenomenal crusader and is really like so retired, but like in quotes. So when we say we brought him out of retirement, I've had some wonderful conversations about the community work that he's continuing to do in medicine and in health adjacent work, and served as the Dean of Admissions and has many leadership roles at Stanford. Was a huge part of the Stanford University Minority Medical Alliance coming into fruition, was a precursor to Rena Thomas and her office, and a co-conspirator with Ron Garcia and Fernando Mendoza at Stanford, with a lot of longstanding diversity efforts. And so taking that role and passion for diversity and enacting it as an admissions dean is not an easy task. So I'll introduce Gabe and let him share his presentation with us. Do you want me to do your slides, Gabe? I have them up if you want me to share them.
Sure. Yeah, you can go to them.
Okay. Can you see them?
I can see them.
Okay.
And just to begin, I'm delighted to be here. I appreciate JP's and Sunny's invitation to share my stuff, and this is my email. I'm happy to take specific questions or comments or whatever in the future through email. I am retired, but I'm engaged, just a different level. Next slide, please. Okay, or unless I can go ahead and actually. So I tried to give you my idea of my geographic origin so that you understand that I've been elsewhere as well. And that has a lot to do with why I think I'm in some ways particularly suited for this position. I was Cuban born. We left in 1960 and learned English in South Florida. Yes, yeah. And interestingly enough, I learned it from my current colleague, Neil Gesundheit, because we were in third grade together. Neil is currently our Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education at Stanford. And if it wasn't for his flip cars, I might still be monolingual. And my family moved to Puerto Rico, which is where I consider homeland and where I did a lot of my growing up. And they moved there because my dad actually felt sorry. I gotta mess it. There we go. Because my family felt that for the first time in their lives, they felt that they had hit their particular glass ceiling. As my dad looked for jobs in Florida and looked for opportunities, he felt that he was being discriminated against. He wasn't given the opportunities that we felt he deserved. And so the adults in the family chose to move to Puerto Rico, where they felt that they understood the culture and they understood the sort of the norms and laws of land much better, and which is where I went to high school and did a few sessions of college. Went to school in New York, both undergraduate in Ithaca and medical school at NYU, where I did a lot of growing up. And for the first time really understood the hierarchy of an academic medical center. My advisor in the school was pretty clear to me that if you wanted an academic career, that it was a very different path than if you wanted to be a clinician, and prepared me for making that decision. I first arrived at Stanford in 1977 for residency training, and I stayed for fellowship training, and I didn't get a real job until I was a PGY 10. And part of it was that I had to make up for a lot of the things that I hurried through in both my undergraduate years and in medical school that I felt I really hadn't invested in creating a focus of interest and doing some well. And I did it as a postdoctoral fellow in 3 successive postdoctoral positions. And some of the things that I experienced then was just, so what does it take really to get a position in a competitive environment? And does being an insider help or hinder that decision for the institution? And I would say that I was not offered a job at that time to stay at Stanford, and ended up at Baylor College of Medicine for a couple of years, and as an assistant professor. And it was the ability to experience a different way and a different hierarchy that taught me that there were very different ways that each individual institution actually created room for you. And I'll go into details later. My division chief and department chief changed back at Stanford. I was offered a job to return, which I was gladly took, and actually ended up back where I stayed for the rest of my career. And so that's what I consider my geographic origins. And I must say that I learned that I learned a lot about every place that I spent some time. I chose to go to New York for medical school, or they chose me, and I agreed, because I thought I wanted to really be of service in a city that had a large Puerto Rican community and a large Latino community. And that was one of the reasons why staying at NYU actually made a lot of sense for me. And I did not realize that would be quite similar when I came to Stanford, and I realized that I was joining yet another multicultural community that was very strongly represented by Latinos. Next slide. But this is actually the way that I got into admissions. And my sense is that you have to decide, so what's the entry-level job to get into there? And entry-level jobs, I would say, are different in every institution that I worked in. And in talking to people about how did you end up where you ended up, okay? And I can tell you that the way I approached it was by getting elected to the faculty senate of the medical school as an elected departmental member. And I could have gone in many different routes, but it turns out that at Stanford, at that point, it's no longer the case, but at that point, we didn't serve as deans of admissions. We served as chairs of the committee of admissions of the faculty senate. So the faculty senate was in fact charged with medical education, selection, and many other activities, many other of the academic activities of the school. So that was, I felt, the path of least resistance to in this institution, to a position within the leadership of medical education at Stanford. And I spent some time serving as a senator in an entry-level role. And I would say what I learned at that time was to recognize the doors and recognize which would open if you pushed. And each of those opportunities are different in every institution, and it takes someone who's been in the institution for some time to recognize those opportunities as they come. And also to let you know if this is the likely one that to provide you success. After some service time, I was elected to the executive committee of the Senate. So the executive committee was a committee of 5 senators that basically did the work for the Senate in between Senate meetings and could act independently and made a lot of the proposals for the full Senate to continue. And once you sit on this decision-making body, then you get to comment on what's going on in medical education for the school. And there was going to be a vacancy as the previous dean of admissions was retiring, and we asked for members of the. I mean, we basically put out a call to the faculty to say, "Are you interested in serving in this role?" Including all the current members then of the committee, as well as other people who had no experience in the committee. I had no experience in the committee at that time. There were just a few people who were interested in serving in this position from the faculty. And the interesting thing is that I actually felt I was the person in the group that questioned the suitability of the candidates who self-nominated for the position. And that generally lands you sort of the next question, which is to say, well, maybe you should think about doing this. And I wasn't ready to move in that direction at that time. I felt I wasn't ready because I did not have at that point a secure faculty position. I had not sort of had my promotion to associate professor at that time. And I felt that would actually be a challenge for me to try to keep a research interest and educational interest in my specialty of internal medicine and gastroenterology, and at the same time develop another new interest. I was reassured by my division chief then and my department chair then that I would be considered strongly for advancement, and then I felt more comfortable in taking that role. But it was not a straightforward decision for me because I wanted to have a secure move and one that I felt would not challenge my ability to be promoted. And their decision to actually appoint me and eventually be elected by the Senate to do it is because I expressed a personal interest in shaping the medical workforce. And I recognized that I had to do that not only along school mission lines, which really drove our agenda, but also along societal needs. And I felt that my background as an immigrant, as a Latino, and as a bicultural person suited me specifically for this position. And I'll try to explain it by using the concept in the next slide. So this is a framework that was put together by an organization called the Bay Area Regional Health Inequities Initiative, which is essentially a group of public health officers in the 8 county San Francisco Bay Area. And the way that they envision health has a section that has what we currently do as our health practices and the causes of the causes. And so this is a root cause analysis in some ways of sort of why do you end up with the health conditions that we see in our population? And I want to concentrate on the living conditions, which is in the center of the slide. And my sense is that the conditions in which people live on a regular basis in their neighborhood and their social connections are really a big driver of their health states at all times. And I felt that my experiences, again, as an immigrant, and the experience of immigration, of being a Latino, and initially a Spanish monolingual person, and provided me a particular lens by which I could see how living conditions shape the careers of our applicants to medical school, or our potential applicants to medical school. And I joined a group that had already was thinking, so how do you develop a workforce? And that was our Center of Excellence in Cultural Diversity that Ron and Fernando ran for many years. And that was sort of an ally that I could complement, and that we could in fact work together in shaping our own contribution to the medical workforce. But I felt that I was particularly suited for that because I had personal experience and family experience in those living conditions that shape all of our lives. And I want to stop here to see if you have any questions about some of my career direction before we go about something else. And I'm wondering if one of the particular questions I had for the audience was, do you see different entry-level positions already in your institutions? And I'm happy to, if you want to, I don't know if we can speak up, but you can put them on the chat if you'd like, and I'll share them with the rest. So what are the entry-level positions that you see in your own institution or in the institutions where you've been in the past?
Gabe, I know for me in the admissions space, at the faculty level, obviously there's staff, coordinators and admissions counselors and things like that. There are opportunities for faculty members who are part of admissions or who want to support pipeline programs to learn from staff. And I think this is one of the most valuable aspects. So I had a committee member who asked if, when I was responding to applicants and answering questions, if I would just blind copy her, so she could just sort of read and learn a little bit about how that advising worked. And I thought that was really ingenious, right? Because then she could sort of do it on her own time. And I would get these long emails from students in the pipeline about their complicated situations. And it helped her have a broader parameter and scope of practice, not only in weighing those students later, but also in her ability to do that advising eventually and skill up for that kind of capacity that she wanted to do in the future. So I do think there are sometimes part FTE positions, assistant dean, director, committee chair, vice chairs of these committees. The structures work very differently across institutions.
So Peter Uresta says, serving on the admissions committee, and serving on the admissions committee really connects you to the group, and long-term service on the admissions committee will sometimes introduce you to other positions that are related to the admissions decision, that allow you to begin to have some of your effort for the institution be compensated by the medical education system, and that gives you the time to actually do the work that you want to do. Lisa Montes writes, entry-level positions could be instructor, and instructor is the entry is actually I was instructor for 4 years, so instructor is the entry-level position for a faculty appointment, I would say, and it allows you to understand sort of how people get appointed in your institution, what is the history, that is, who got appointed, and why do you think that person got appointed over others? And I believe that is it's a good position to be in if you're still finishing your training before you get a formal faculty position. The only caveat I would say is that an instructor position is less of an institutional commitment to that potential faculty member, and you can't let those drag on so long without demanding from your institution that that you be considered for an assistant professorship, let's say. One of the doors that opens when pushed is sort of what I offered the faculty senators in taking on this position, because they as a group were very interested to improve the level and improve the opportunity, the level of diversity, and improve the opportunities that brings to people that are potential applicants to medical school. And if that is what you are bringing, and that is the desire that you bring to work, this is an opportunity that will be heard, and this is an opportunity, and this is a position that you bring that will be valued. And so I would say that if that is your background and that is your personal interest, that is a door that pushes when open. That opens when pushed. Okay, pretty clearly. And I find that that this is an important consideration in seeking people who support the admissions process in every institution. I can't think of an institution for which this is not an expressed core value. And so my sense is that if you bring something special to this effort, then you will be valued for what you bring. Good. So, and so we talked about sort of what might the entry levels position could be. I would also say that other roles in medical education that bring you close to decision makers within the medical education group allows you to become aware of opportunities as they develop and allow you to be considered for those positions if you bring something that is aligned with the institutional desires and values. And so I think of Sunny's sort of career direction of coming from sort of diversity and inclusion and equity to admissions was a natural transition. I think of others who come from medical education, actually from advising, that is, of your advising group in your institution, to end up in an admissions role is another natural transition. And there's a lot of medical education people who organize the early clinical experiences for all of our schools, and they are generally in medical education roles in the dean's office. And those are, again, opportunities that you can take on as something that places you in people who are in decision-making positions. And I think in thinking strategically, so how do you end up in the position that you want? You can approach it from many different directions. And what you have to learn is, what is the lay of the land? How did people do it before you in your institution? And did it work out? And if it didn't work out, why? And if it did work out, can I actually use the same strategy to end up where I want to end up?
I can just add, Gabe, early in my career, I think in my early 20s, I just tried to pay attention to and gravitate towards projects and extracurricular professional work, committee work, the AAMC and regional leadership that I was excited about. And so one of the things that happened early in my career was criminal background checks became a reality for medical school applicants. And all of a sudden there was all these intersections of like, how is this going to be part of the admissions process? And what is the impact going to be on the applicants? And how are schools going to use this? And what sort of guidance do we need to give? And that intersection around equity and access, and student experience and faculty practice, like, got me the most excited. And so I recommend that everyone have sort of a very brief 1 or 2 sentence kind of career purpose statements. Everything that you do in your career somehow falls under this umbrella. And mine is, I'm committed to access and equity in medical education and healthcare. That's what everything that I do falls under that. And it personally meshes and integrates with who I am as a person and my personal values, but my professional direction as well. So when it came time to think about moving from directorship level in DEI to admissions and student affairs, it was a really good opportunity to advance access and equity and to bring the things I had learned on the diversity side into a more integrated space in admissions approaches. And then subsequently an opportunity to return in a more senior role in DEI really fit with that because of the insights that I have from being in those other spaces. So if you follow passion and purpose and the things that get you excited, it's not going to feel like work. And I remember working on the guidance, the national guidance as part of the committee and doing the projects. And it just was exciting for me to be able to think about we could craft a policy that's well informed that prevents harm, right? And that prevents more people even losing access to consideration in admissions, and how important that interdigitation between national policy all the way down to like lived student experiences that are sitting in front of me impacted by these tools and rules that we create.
That's a really good point. And I think that those considerations also bring opportunities for professional advancement that have to do with actually looking at those issues in a deeper way and try to answer some of the questions that in that field. I remember we shared an interest in background checks at that time. I remember talking to you a lot about that. And I worry that we were about to implement them without recognizing the history of our criminal justice system. And my old residency classmate at Halpern, who was then the dean of students at Duke, and I sort of got together and said, we need to write a piece that basically says, we need to understand what we're doing when we're asking every applicant to medical school to file a criminal background check. And so we wrote a piece, which was initially not accepted by academic medicine. It was initially not accepted because they felt that it needed a pro and a con argument. So it was actually published as a debate, and a debate that had a pro side, which we didn't argue, and a con side that we did argue, I thought, so that people, as we implemented this requirement, that we understood the context in which this is the societal context in which criminal background checks occur. And I think that helped us interpret them as they came forward, interpret the results as they came forward. So there are both opportunities for professional development that come across what we all bring to this conversation. And they're good to use. And they are career enhancing, I would say.
So one of the things that that opportunity afforded was a chance to do a session at the annual meeting within the GSA programming, where we really wanted to explain and bring to life and actively create a learning opportunity for GSA leadership around what Gabe was saying. How are we operationalizing this? It's not just black and white, it's not simple. And so I worked with a team of presenters. We designed a session where we actually wrote cases and we gave them different genders and races. And then we gave them criminal histories and background information. And we had like some high grades, medium grades, low grades intermixed, and we broke people out into tables. Basically, at the end of it, people were much more harsher on students with low grades, on and it really showed the biases, the decisions that these tables had made. Would you accept this person? And then everyone sort of was able to vote. And so being able to operationalize the learning parts of the admission is really what got me excited about my faculty journey. And that, like, wait a second, like designing learning opportunities like this and training like this can be part of my faculty career, that I'm all in on that, right? Because I don't do lab research and whatever, but it really helped me think about, oh, I do want to do a PhD in higher education. I want to learn about pedagogical models and active learning and curriculum design so I can bring those things into shaping justice work with faculty members in DEI, in admissions, and student affairs. So it's kind of one of those sort of one thing led to another, and I feel like I just pick up the passion breadcrumbs as I go, and I try to follow the things that are most exciting and fulfilling for me.
Before I leave this slide, I want to make sure that others don't have questions about sort of why you are specifically suited for a role like this. Because I think sometimes we don't do a self-inventory of what we bring to things in a standard way. And those are the kinds of things that are really what I would say your currency and your asset to take the next step forward. And being very clear, writing a statement of purpose, as Sunny would say, or thinking about not only what you want to do, but why you are the right person to do it. Is key to saying, because that will allow you to think about, so how do people develop this skill set, and how do my experiences help me develop, and what can I do further to understand this in a disciplinary way and in a way that allows me to shape my career. So good. And okay, so next slide. So there's a quote that I can't remember who to attribute this with, but I think it was for a newspaper editor. And when someone was coming to a job interview and for a position as a newspaper writer, and when this person got hired, they seemed to be doing work that was important to them and that adhered to the principles of the newspaper, but in fact were always critiqued by his direct supervisors and saying, let's do this. And he finally said, well, I've been doing all this work. I think that when I look at the values of the institution, this is really what I would hope you would want me to do. And then what the editor or the page editor told them was this: I think you need to remember that there are principles and there are priorities, and that most day-to-day decisions are made by priorities. They're not necessarily, that is, what is the immediate priority for this today? Not necessarily by the guiding principles of the institutions. And what you need to do is actually reflect back on that and push back on that and say, if I understand your priority, but I want to do this priority in the setting of what is our ultimate institutional goal. And be comfortable in dealing with the fact that priorities sometimes derail very, very good mission and vision oriented efforts. And make sure you never forget that what you bring to this is really why you were hired and why you will succeed. I think it's, and I'll think of an example of when something like this happened. I will again emphasize that you need, if you want to move in this direction, to understand the history of the people that preceded you who had this role, who were the decision makers that got them there. Why do you think they were chosen versus another person? And possibly spend some time with them. Before I took the job as Dean of Admissions, I actually I didn't have a lot of money to do this, so I actually visited the deans of admissions of all the other professional schools in my institution. And I asked them the question. So I asked them the question, which is, what do you like about your job, and what makes your job difficult to do? And I got some very coherent answers from our dean of the law school, our dean of the engineering school, and our dean of the business school, which are the other professional schools at Stanford. And they were very helpful. I also talked to some deans of admissions that I had met at the AAMC meetings, and just to ensure that this was not just an institutional sort of concern. And I would say that what I learned was that most of the challenges were shared challenges throughout most of the institutions, and it had to do with, how do you measure excellence? What is excellence for the purpose of choosing an applicant to medical school? And how do you provide a mechanism by which excellence is made? And when you basically use what I would call the numbers approach to excellence, you miss out on so many of the variables that make a applicant to medical school a wonderful choice for you. And those are the kinds of things that everybody felt challenged with. And so I had to think about, so how do you put those into operation in a way that makes sense for the institution and will be accepted by the institution? And that was what I felt was my biggest challenges. And again, because many of these challenges were around the issue of how diversity brings excellence, then having some wonderful colleagues in the Center of Excellence in Cultural Diversity, that really was my sort of my ability to do my work well, really relied on my collaboration with them.
I have a question that came to me in the chat privately. So what do you do when your institutional values and priorities are at odds with the institution, right? And what was that tension that came up when sort of racism came up, sexism came up in your role as an admissions dean? How did you learn to navigate that? What skill sets did you build around that?
That's a good question, and it's a good question because I think this is where we can we can do some learning about why we hold the positions that we do, and why do they make sense for the institution to also do them. And it generally requires learning a lot more than you feel you know about what are the outcomes of different people as they navigate our educational system, and what are the ways in which you can modify those outcomes if you are interested in placing their voice in your student body. So I'll give you an example. So I inherited a very good system that predicted that was designed by Fernando Mendoza's neighbor, who was a biostatistician, which predicted with really good accuracy who failed in medical school at Stanford. Who were the individuals who failed? And I inherited that system, and I looked at it and I said, this makes sense. But I also reframed it to say, well, don't we want a mechanism to try to figure out who succeeds? And in order to do that, you had to decide, so what are the measures of success that align with the mission and the vision of the school? And so I sat down with my then senior associate dean of medical education. It was Julie Parsonet, and we said, so let's define success for medical students, and let's see and then let's look at their admissions data, and let's see who succeeds and who doesn't succeed. And I'll tell you more. So our 5 glows of success is that it had to do with, did they do the things that we expected them to do while they were here? Did they contribute to a leadership position? Did they contribute to creation of new knowledge? Did they succeed academically in the classroom? Did they create a willingness to apply to did they apply to competitive residency programs in order to promote an academic career in future? And so we set up a way of saying, if you fulfill all those characteristics, and gave different value points to each of them, who succeeds based on their initiative? Well, what I can tell you is that their MCAT scores had very little impact on success. Their grade point averages have very little impact on success. And what had significant impact on success is that they arrive from a peer institution, that is, from a research-intensive private institution with a lot of resources. And the kids that came from those institutions seemed to succeed much more often in everything we asked them to do than students who came from community college, than students who came from an under-resourced higher education. And you could react to that in a few ways. And the way that we reacted is, we need to change our advising system. We need to make sure that those students who did not experience a well-resourced institution, which is ours is, can understand where the opportunities lie, how to take advantage of the opportunities, and to make sure they are active participants in all of them. And so we created a totally different advising system. We copied essentially Duke's and University of Rochester's system, and it made a lot of sense for us to move in that direction. But the reason why was data driven. It was data driven to say, it's not a question that we don't want this voice in our class. It's a question that we need to have better support for them once they arrive. And so that, I think, is how we have to decide sort of who do we want in the classroom and how do we make sure they succeed while they're here. And I think that is an admissions role. That is an admissions responsibility to say, I need to make sure that my institution will support this candidate in the same way, in a different way, because this candidate comes without experience of how to navigate a peer institution. And those were one of the very important goals of creating a new advising group.
Yeah, supporting them in an equitable way. I think for me, I've been at public institution, a private elite institution, a Jesuit institution, a state school, and now I'm back at a private institution. And I think there are often competing entities in this admission space. And I had a mentor early on in my career at Utah that talked about, what are your guideposts when it comes to integrity? And you should always make those clear and sort of know what your stop loss is in any role. And at one point he was asked to accept a donor's kid to the school. And the president was new in the president's role. And so this is the president of the wider university calling and saying, is this kid so bad? Come on, his dad's going to give all this money if we just give him a spot. And this mentor of mine said, I asked to meet with the president and I prepared 3 letters. And I met with them and I brought the files of students that had been accepted. And I brought the files of this candidate and I had the committee scores and said, I don't control this process. I uphold the integrity of it on behalf of the faculty, and that's my role. And I can't do this job if that integrity is in question. So the choice is yours. Here's an acceptance letter for this kid that you'd like. And if you want me to sign this one, I will also be signing this letter, and it is my resignation. And here's a letter of declination. And if I sign this one, then we could, these are your choices. And in just hearing that experience, it just I've never forgot it, because it is a moment of making sure that your integrity in this work is front and center. And I decided that I would be more outspoken about some of the things that Gabe was saying, more anchored to data, not letting people get away with saying things that communicate bias or that really, express forms of deficit around students that are coming from communities that I identify with and that I want to champion. Because the opposite of what we're really doing when you're equating Black and brown and first gen and all those things with deficit is that's actually white supremacy, right? That's what it's called, is that these people are better, because they're whiter and more elite and all those things. So, and there were times within even the Jesuit institution that I called faculty onto the carpet with our Jesuit values and said, so we don't really believe these things, the things that are on the walls and the buildings, like these aren't the things we don't want to give opportunities. Equity, there were things around fees and I really leaned on those values. And as long as folks were willing to respond to that, that was kind of my true north. But I certainly didn't win every battle. And it is tough because you experience your own transference in those moments of seeing yourself and your family and students that you've worked with. And you're really there, to uphold the process. So, but I think admissions is one of the most and power really traveled. That it really wasn't before the expanded minority admissions exercise in the 90s. There was a precursor to holistic review and Project 3000 by 2000 and some of these initiatives we've had nationwide around diversity and coming through those admissions portals. Distance traveled is sort of like normal to us now, but that wasn't always the case, right? And so your early use of data, think about separating not who can do the work, but who do we want in the class? And the intersection of those things is really important focus of leadership in these roles.
Thanks, Sunny. And this is a great segue to the question that was asked in the chat by Aida Benal. And her question is, you mentioned the importance of doing a self-inventory and what we bring to the role. Could you give some advice about how to successfully communicate the value of those perspectives Latinos bring to their colleagues, bosses, and administrators? Other than showing data, for example, the growing Latino population, any other strategies? So I would say that Sunny used the value strategy in making her argument. And I think of this as trying to figure out right and wrong, trying to figure out sort of where do our ethics sit. And a values argument is a good, strong argument, but remember that sometimes principles get faded by priorities, right? And so there's other ways to do it as well. And one of them is to look for the greatest benefit to the most people, right? And my sense is that is another approach, which is a very utilitarian approach in which you look at saying, so what are we doing for creating a medical workforce that brings benefit to the greatest number of people, not only of the participants, but of their future patients. And that utilitarian approach is also an argument that you can use. Maybe others have other thoughts about this. I've tried to always think about that there's many different ways of getting someone to understand why you hold the position that you do. And I tried to explore as many of those ways as possible.
I got another question in the chat, if I may just weigh in for a second, a little bit more about a personal mission statement and that as sort of a career North Star and how did I develop mine? I think I tried to pay attention to what brought me joy and what challenges I embraced versus wanted to avoid, which battles had rewards on the other side that I felt like were really worth waging. And so my personal mission statement of, I've dedicated my life to access and equity in medical education and healthcare. And so just coming towards that, a lot of it is my family story, legacy of my family as Japanese immigrants who were imprisoned during the war, who had their rights taken away, the kindness and justice the kindness and the standing up for justice that many folks in my family experienced over the years. And I have those stories as part of my great grandmother's autobiography that she wrote, and my grandfather's memoirs as well. And those deeply anchor me into how important it is in medicine and healthcare in these spaces. So one way to interrogate your why, there's a book by Simon Sinek that's called Start With Why. So I think that's a good one to dig into and listen to it on your way to work, and just some tips about paying attention to the kinds of challenges that you feel that you embrace and run towards, right? And I sort of noticed that a colleague of mine once said, don't you ever get tired of just falling into windmills? Because I seem to go towards all of these really complicated and critical and heated places where policy was on the line, and there was a lot happening. And I thought about it and I said, no, I don't. Like, I really like being in the thick of things, knowing that my voice might make a difference to shape something moving forward. And with that, I've been able to say, work with advocacy organizations to get undocumented students eligible for fee waivers. We've just changed the fee assistance program again. It will be released for 2022, that you don't have to have citizenship. Older students that are non-traditional won't have to get their parents' information. We're trying to work on larger systems, systemic inequalities, as well as personally mediated, racism and oppression. So I think paying attention to what brings you joy, what challenges you embrace, and also, how to balance those things and integrate those things with your personal life matters too. Because I don't think that there's such thing as work-life balance. I think it's all just work-life chaos. And how much do you love the chaos that comes from your work and your life colliding? And so I have a lot of integration, which minimizes some of the chaos, but there's still constant challenges there too.
I'm so glad you brought up work-life balance, because my sense is that we can't do it all. And we can try to do it all, but it takes a high personal toll. So one of the things that I counsel my colleagues, my junior colleagues at the university, is try to decide what are you willing to do with excellence, and then choose to do a lot of that. Because you're going to be asked to do other things, but your main job, the things that define you, the things that are important to you, you should have enough time to do them with excellence. And and that includes your personal life. So you have to decide, how do you make the time to do the things that you want to do in an excellent way? And that generally means narrowing your focus and making sure that you can keep your focus on the things that you want to do well. And when you take on more things, remind yourself that you have to spend less time on those things that have defined you up to this point. And I would say that's one of the things that I learned from my mentor, my many mentors, is to say, don't forget to pay attention to the important reason why you are here, and make sure that you define it in a way that and time it in a way that you can do those things well. So let me talk a little bit about mentorship. I was lucky that from the start, every person who was in leadership in my department of medicine when I arrived as a resident also had a leadership role for the institution at large. So the first person that I met, who was a house staff director at the time, was an interim house staff director. He eventually became the chief medical officer for the institution. The person who succeeded him during a time of transition from one department chair to another was a person who was dean of admissions in the past and dean of students for a while. I was interested initially in a career in infectious diseases. One of the attendants in which I did 2 rotations in infectious diseases is someone who was a long-term dean of students at Stanford. So it turned out that I had lots of role models who had both their faculty research and educational interests that were department and discipline based, but also had a role in the greater good of the institution. And they were the people who allowed me to see that was not only feasible, but amazingly rewarding as well. And so I worry that that if you don't have access to someone who has this duality in their career, that you may miss some opportunities in thinking about, so how do decisions get made in your institution, and how people advance once they enter that path. And those are the kinds of people that provided me with an amazing amount of useful. My own department chair eventually became the president of the faculty senate. And so those are the kinds of things that allow me to navigate it, and particularly to have honest conversations and critical evaluation of my performance in all of those areas, because in many ways, that's what you expect from someone who has your best interests at heart, to be able to tell you, yeah, this is the way things work here, and this is where you align with what's expected of you, and this is where you're not aligning with what's expected of you, and make sure that you meet the expectations so that your advancement can go forward. And meeting with people who were successful in doing all those things were very helpful for me. And I guess I should name them. It was Peter Gregory, who was my mentor during my training, and Roy Mathley, who was also Fernando's mentor in his career, and Ken Vasti, who was my infectious disease consultant, who eventually said, maybe you shouldn't join our group, just get interested in our group, which was very good. So let's talk a little bit about developing a pipeline. One of the things that I've learned from my colleagues at Stanford is that you have to develop pipelines where candidates exist, and to understand the opportunities that people have to education, to promote their education. And so many of our Latinos actually come from community college backgrounds, come from places where they're not sure that they belong in a professional school. And I think it is amazingly important that you both support, promote, and help develop pipeline programs that extend as young as you can, and in places where they have traditionally not gone. So I can point out to Ron Garcia's great collaborative that he has with other schools in promoting professional health careers in the community college system. And that was preceded by the University of California Office of the President's initiative of expanding their conferences and their collaborations with the community college system in California. And so I think that it's important to know, so where are the people that we want in our classroom, and to make sure that they are provided a path and they are provided guidance along that path so they can achieve the result. I am not a pipeline specialist, but I can provide testimony of their success, of their students who arrive. I can provide support for the work that they do. I can provide, direct thoughts to the candidates that participate in this, and sometimes be of help. But I think that would be, for me, other than providing support at a distance, that was going to be a long time commitment that I wasn't sure I could do. So I was happy to have such a strong effort at the institution.
Dr. Garcia, I have to ask this question. And during this event, I have heard that everybody has been lucky because they have good mentors. But in the medical field, I believe that in the research field, it's a little bit different. Do you have any can you say anything about it? Because I have heard from students who, master's degree, PhD degrees, that really have a lot of conflicts with the mentors, and the mentors, many, I'm not saying all of them, trying to stop them to progress in the future.
Arnold, that's a great question, and I think it's if you're trying to look at different aspects of a medical career, I think that the mentorship and advising and support resources from many medical schools are sometimes increasingly focused or preferentially focused to the medical students than to the graduate students. And one of the things that the institution has to come to grips with is the fact that, medical students go through a standardized curriculum, right? Whereas graduate students have not only departmental-based curriculums, right? Every department does things differently, but they also have the prominence of the principal investigator in whose lab you work. And so the complexity of doing mentoring, advising, and support in the graduate school is different than for the professional aspects, the professional clinical aspects of medical education. And in some ways, one of the things that our institution was able to do was to create a parallel structure for graduate students that was well resourced and that allowed sort of greater interaction than was traditionally seen in the graduate student advising, mentoring, and support structures. And I think, but how do you do that in every institution is a challenge, because for busy people to volunteer or time to do this kind of work is generally done in their own lab and not necessarily outside of their own research group. And so then you need sort of professional staff that are going to do this, that require institutional support, that require institutional buy-in for the kinds of decisions and advice that they're providing, and that it can be, and they could be creating even a sense of conflict or different goals between what I would call the professional advisor or support person and the academic advisor and support person. There has to be a way that a dialogue can be created so that people understand that excellence in all aspects of your life is an important goal, even for graduate students and postdocs, right? And that's a big issue. And I'm not going to tell you that we have the right answer, but I think that creating parallel structures to a very intensive sort of advising program on the professional side is very important to do the same on the research side.
Yeah, probably the big difference is that the medical doctors, are here just to be part of the life of others, right? The patients. Scientists, they want to do something just for themselves. That can make a lot of difference.
Yeah. So when I think about who contributes to health, the graph that I showed you was amazingly public healthy, right? It was very public healthy. But the piece that's missing there is is sort of how science also contributes to health. And to see, right, how science contributes to health, and from the very, very basic and methodologic stuff to clinical sort of trials to implementation trials, and to see that as an important part of what an academic medical center should be doing, which most value is an important piece. But it is one of many contributors to the health of a population as well, right? And so we need to keep that in focus as we, in fact, develop careers that will be, I would argue, just as important as those who do implementation science and those who do educational science and those who do clinical research science. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
So, Luz Garcinis, maybe we can stop here because we're running out of time, I think. Right, it's a great point that why we need scientist practitioners. We need students to know how to evaluate the quality. Oops, I lost it. How to evaluate the quality of science and how to translate it into practice and adapt it to diverse populations. Yeah, so the idea that there's many different disciplines or disciplinary approaches to success in medicine is really important. And I think I spent a lot of time doing work in sort of education and doing work in clinical research, mostly implementation science, and not doing fundamental work in science, although I did spend some time in a virology lab early in my career. And my ability to understand basic virology translated into a clinical research interest in treating viral diseases in people. And having the basic virology training made me a much more effective clinical researcher in virologic diseases. And I can't tell you how much I valued my time in the lab, even though it wasn't my eventual choice in my career, because it taught me about how to value evidence and how to make sure that I was always dealing with the evidence that I wanted to take a next step forward. Okay.
I think we've addressed most of the questions in the chat. Gabe, do you have any closing comments or advice for folks that are thinking about including admissions in their career trajectory? What sort of advice would you summarize and give?
So I think you should think of a career in admissions as a great opportunity for the institution and for yourself. It's amazingly rewarding job. And it's immediately rewarding and distantly rewarding, because I hear from my undergraduates at Stanford who eventually made it to our medical school, who now have wonderful careers that were shaped in many ways by how they learned and what they learned during their whole career. I also want you to realize that there are some threats that can happen to those opportunities if you don't make sure that you're getting advice from people who have traveled this road before, and that open up not only the opportunities that are along the road, but what are some of the potential threats that could happen. And they could be, making sure you're resourced well, making sure that you have the staff that allows you to do your work and do it at the level in which you want to do it, all those kinds of things. And that there are not only resources in your own institution, but resources sort of national resources. And so attending your professional society meetings regionally and nationally. I always like the regional meetings because it allowed you to really have substantive conversations with small groups in which there was a lot of give and take. I was delighted to be part of a group that was put together of all the deans of admissions of all of the schools in California. Of all of the medical schools in California, that was put together by the University of California Office of the President. And I can tell you that may have been my most exciting professional development time, is to be able to sit in a room in which we took no notes and just talk to each other about how we're going to solve problems in medical education. And that was very, very important to me. And don't forget your advisors. So the advisors to the health professions are actually, I always consider them my clients. I like the students and I like the applicants, but in fact, the advisors were the people who translated your message to their school. And as a result of them being your allies and having their potential applicants understand who you're looking for and how you do your selection, and who are the people from their institution that succeed and why, that helped me tremendously in my job. because having others basically be able to say, yeah, this is how this works, is very helpful, and learning from them about their own students and their own grading systems, et cetera. So don't neglect the hand that feeds you, as I said.
Thank you so much for that. And I know we're out of time, so I want to thank everyone for their engagement in the session. I put my email in the chat. I don't know if, Gabe, you want to retype yours again if folks want to follow up. And I'll echo something that was said at the beginning, which is don't underestimate and count yourself out the contributions and perspectives and strengths that you bring to this work, and you are needed. And we're having líderes because, you know, we need representation in this space to really advance Latinx representation in medical education at all these levels. So we welcome conversations about your career pursuits, and even for me, I'm again sort of mid-career, so I love always making connections and us linking arm in arm and moving forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Sunny.
I think we're on, let me just look at the schedule real quick. I think we're on a break right now for a bit.
Yeah.
Let me see. Yeah, so we break for lunch for the next 45 minutes, and the breakout sessions begin vice chancellors and vice presidents roles from 12:45 to 1:45, and then we have another break, and then we have one more session of breakout. So we'll see everyone back at the next session at 12:45. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.